So I think that on every level, people need to recognize our mutual interdependence, and that we need to live our lives that way. We need to live our lives in a way that we recognize that what car we buy, or how we build our houses, or what food we put in ourselves, or also how we consume. All these things are things that all these acts are acts that have an impact on everybody.
I'm your host, Adam Met, and today we're chatting with Dr. David Lehrer, the Director of International Development at the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies. David moved to Israel from the U.S. in 1978, becoming a member of Kibbutz Ketura, the cooperative living space on which the Arava Institute is located. In 2001, he became executive director of the institute, which brings together students from neighboring countries to solve environmental issues affecting the entire region. Just this year, David got his PhD in geography and environmental development and became the director of international development at the institute. We talk about 2,000-year-old dates, solar energy in Israel, and other incredible projects. A quick reminder that we're planting a tree for every person who subscribes to this podcast, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. And without further ado, here is David Lehrer on Planet Reimagined. David, welcome. There are very few topics in the world that are more polarizing than Israel. And, I want to really dig deep into the relationships between environmentalism, community building, and how you see all of this as a pathway to peace. But just to ground ourselves specifically in Israel, can we start by talking a little bit about what a kibbutz is, because it's pretty central to the narrative of what we're going to talk about today?
Sure. So a kibbutz is a communal settlement, originally based almost exclusively on agricultural branches, where we live as a community together according to the basic philosophy from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. The kibbutz I live on, Kibbutz Ketura, which is where the Arava Institute is located, is still a very traditional kibbutz, and we have not gone through a privatization process.
You moved there in the 70s, or you moved to where you are right now in the 70s. What drew you? You grew up in the United States, right?
Correct.
What drew you?
The Israeli accent.
So the lifestyle, was it something very specific that you moved there for? What about this type of living drew you to Israel and the kibbutz?
Well, first of all, I grew up in the United States. I grew up in North Carolina, and I grew up in a youth organization called Young Judaea, which was very active. And it was sort of how I connected to my Jewish identity. It was a Jewish youth organization. So I connected to my Jewish identity through this organization. And this organization, in some ways, sort of exhibited a lot of the sort of egalitarian, communal lifestyle through our summer camp experience, through our throughout the year conventions and conclaves and meetings and stuff. It was all very much a part of this sort of socialist, communal Jewish lifestyle. When I was 17, because of my experience in the youth organization in Young Judaea, I decided to come to Israel and to volunteer on a kibbutz, which I did in 1973. I spent a summer on Kibbutz Ketura, which is near Jerusalem. I fell in love with Israel. I fell in love with kibbutz. I said, this is what I want to do with my life. And then 5 years later, I moved back to Kibbutz Ketura, which was founded by this youth organization that I was a member of, together with other members of Young Judaea. We moved together. Because I was attracted to the idea of pioneering, being setting this. It was the kibbutz itself was only 5 years old when I first moved there, and it was romantic. It was exciting. It was also fit in very well with my own values, connecting to community, connecting to nature, equality, and socialism as an important part of my value system.
So this value system is something that's central to what's going to be our entire conversation today. And this next question that I'm going to ask you could take hours to talk about. But briefly, obviously, peace in the Middle East and Africa is a local issue. It's a global issue. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your philosophy on the role that sustainability and environmentalism plays in peacekeeping specifically in the region where you are.
The environment can't wait for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and working together on environmental issues that are of mutual concern for everybody in the region builds relationships that can be a foundation for peace. So for over 25 years, the Arava Institute has brought together Jews and Arabs, Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, also internationals, in order to teach that nature knows no borders. There are many organizations in the region that try and bring people together sort of to build peace, to talk about peace. The problem with that is that as soon as there's no peace, as soon as something political happens or something connected to the security situation in the region, everybody kind of throws up their hands and say, "Oh, we can't talk now about that. We have to take a step back." And at the Arava Institute, the exact opposite happens because what brings us together, what binds us together, is not some kind of kumbaya idea of peace and we all have to love each other, but really enlightened self-interest. We all have an interest, whatever we may think politically, whatever we may think about religion or borders or refugees or occupation or terrorism or all the things that are kind of hot button subjects. When it comes to the environment, we share the same air, we share the same water. We share the same ecosystems. The only way you can protect those things which your life depends on and your lifestyle depends on is to work with your neighbor to make sure that they're protected.
Can you give me a few examples of what the Arava Institute does to help bring these neighbors together? Because I'm sure for people who are around the world listening, saying it is one thing, like, okay, we're going to bring Israelis and Palestinians together to work on environmental issues, but I'd love for them to hear about some of the specific projects that you're working on that show clear results that, yes, we can get these two different places to work together over these really clear, concrete issues.
So, the biggest impact that the Arava Institute has had over the past 25 years is the fact that we have consistently run an academic program which brings Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians together with international students, an academic program that is in partnership with Ben-Gurion University that provides academic credit for courses in environmental policy, ecology, earth sciences, sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, religion and the environment, a variety of subjects that really give students the tools they need to become environmental leaders and professionals for when they go back to their home communities. And the result is that we now have a network of graduates of the Arava Institute throughout the region, over 1,000 in the region who care about the environment, who are professionals, who have the tools to work on the environment and have the network, the cross-border network, to enable cross-border cooperation. So that's really the first big achievement. But from there, we've taken our scientific studies, our work that we've done in renewable energy, in sustainable agriculture, in cross-border water management, and implemented them on the ground. For example, for many years, one of the main projects that the Arava Institute worked on through our Center for Transboundary Water Management was the issue of transboundary water that, especially surface water and underground water, that crosses borders. Israel and Palestine share aquifers, the mountain aquifers between Israel and the West Bank, and the coastal aquifers between Israel and Gaza. Whatever you do on one side of the border impacts the other. So the Hebron River, which flows from, it's an ephemeral river, which means that it only flows at certain times of the year during the rainy season normally, but now flows all year long because of wastewater that's dumped into it, both by Israelis and by Palestinians, seeps into the wastewater, flows through the central Negev, from the West Bank through the central Negev down to Gaza, and eventually into the Mediterranean Sea, polluting everybody's aquifers, polluting everybody's riverbeds. So the Arava Institute has been working for years now, monitoring both sides of the border. Because our students are Palestinians and Jordanians, we're able to send them out to work in the West Bank, monitoring the quality of water, monitoring where this wastewater is coming from sewage, from rock quarries, from olive presses, and able to identify these specific pollutants, and able to suggest policies to try and manage that. So we have monitoring on the Israeli side, we have monitoring on the Palestinian side, and we're the only organization in the region that has data sets that cover the whole area, so that even the Israeli Drainage Authority, which is responsible for making sure that these areas remain clean, comes to us and says, look, you guys have the data, we don't. Can you share it with us? Our Track 2 Environmental Forum, which was established specifically to try and take what we've learned and what we teach in the academic sphere and implement it on the ground, bottom up, in order to show the policymakers that there are partners for peace. There are millions of partners for peace. We prove it every day by working together with our Palestinian partners on wastewater treatment systems, on water projects, on renewable energy projects in Gaza and in the West Bank. Over the past year, the Arava Institute has worked with our Palestinian partners to bring drinking water machines to Gaza. Gaza's drinking water is like 98% undrinkable, according to the World Health Organization, because of pollutants, because of salinization. So we've worked with WaterGen, which is an Israeli technology company that produces an atmospheric water generator that takes water out of the atmosphere, out of the humidity in the atmosphere, turns it into high quality drinking water. And partnering with communities in Gaza and with our Palestinian partners and with WaterGen, we were able to bring two drinking water machines into two municipalities in Gaza this past year. In the West Bank, we're working together with the Palestinian Water Authority and the Israeli Civil Administration to design a trunk line that will bring treated wastewater that can be used in agriculture from an area near Ramallah, which has wastewater which can't be used there because there's no agriculture in that area, down to the Jericho Valley, where farmers are going to be able to use it to produce fruits and vegetables with treated wastewater. And this is going to be a major project that we're working on in complete partnership with both sides.
So I want to pull out two things from what you just talked about. The first is that a few times on this podcast, we've talked about the role of academia and the way academia sits kind of next to policy, but also very much separated from policy. Because in a lot of academic institutions around the world, they want to maintain their own independence and they kind of refuse to translate their work in a way that's most effective for advocates and for policymakers. So what you're doing really kind of builds that bridge between the academic world and the world of real action in making policy and advocacy. Do you think that this is a model that can be adopted in other places, or do you think academia as a whole is too far gone and too separated from the policymakers of the world?
Yeah, look, I think that, I think that we are a kind of model. I don't know that every university or every academic institute could adopt our model.
Sure.
But I do think that there's a lot of room there. And I think that there are a lot of academics, there are a lot of universities that are looking to see how they can have a wider impact than just publishing another paper in another journal. And so but the Institute was founded in a sense by academic activists. Our founder was Professor Alon Tal, who is a professor at Tel Aviv University, but has been an environmental activist from the time he moved here to this country. And I think that spirit has continued in the Arava Institute. We see ourselves not just as a think tank, but as a do tank. And we like to take what we are studying and what we are, theorizing and try and bring it out into the field. We also want to be able to give the students that are studying here the tools to actually make a difference when they go back to their home communities. And so we have ready partners in the region from among our alumni and from our colleagues who are both in the academic world and practitioners to take the knowledge that we're developing in our centers for renewable energy or our Center for Transboundary Water Management and translate that into pilot projects and even commercial projects. We've had a number of commercial projects that have been spin-offs from the Arava Institute due to the originally academic work that was done at the Institute, but has now turned into applied research.
Amazing. That's great. There are a few specific Arava Institute projects that I want to talk about because they seemed very strange and also very exciting at the same time. I read that you recently grew dates from Judean time, that's over 2,000 years ago, by sprouting seeds that you found on an archaeological dig. First, can you tell us about this project and what's the purpose of it?
Right. So this is it's absolutely an amazing story. And it started at least 10 years ago, I would say. My colleague, Dr. Elaine Soloway, who also happens to be a member of my kibbutz, has been doing research into crops and plants that are appropriate for arid lands that can help countries deal with desertification and can bring back areas, ecosystems to life. So Dr. Soloway runs our Center for Sustainable Agriculture. And about 10 years ago, a colleague of hers from Hadassah Hospital, Dr. Sarah Salone, came to her and said, look, I have access to date seeds that were found on Masada, which is an archaeological dig in Israel. We believe they're 2,000-year-old date seeds, and they've been sitting in an archaeologist's desk in a clay jar where he found them, and he's not doing anything with them. Would you be willing to try and sprout them, see if they could sprout? So Elaine thought, well, that's crazy. I mean, these things are 2,000 years old. How could it be that they would sprout? But she did a bit of research, and she found that there was an article about an incident that happened during World War II at the British Museum when it was bombed, and there was a fire and a display case of ancient wheat seeds, which were about 1,000 years old, broke open and fell on the floor, and the fire department came and there was a fire and they put out the fire with water. And there are eyewitness accounts that those 1,000-year-old wheat seeds sprouted. No one did anything about it, so they died very quickly. But it was sort of a sign that perhaps ancient seeds could be sprouted. And she thought, well, she had been given 6 seeds by Dr. Salone, and she tried different methods of heat and water on each one to see which method would work. Finally, one of them sprouted, a date palm that we call Methuselah, after the oldest man in the Bible. And we planted it, or she planted it in her hothouse, and after a few years brought it out and planted it at the Research and Visitors Park of the Arava Institute right outside our office. And anybody who comes to visit us, of course, can meet the 2,000-year-old date tree, or the date tree that was sprouted from a 2,000-year-old date. We did carbon dating, by the way, and found that it was true. It's 2,000 years old. We were, I don't know if you know this, but date trees or date palms are either male or female. So the males are, as we know, males are not very important. We're kind of generic. Obviously, the important gender is the female who produces the dates. And we were all hoping, even though we had named this palm tree Methuselah, we were all hoping that Methuselah would actually turn out to be a girl and would produce dates. That was not the case. Methuselah turned out to live up to his name. But more recently, Dr. Salone came back to Elaine with more date, this time 6 more date seeds. And this time, Elaine, knowing what to do, was actually able to sprout all 6 date trees. And we now have planted them in our park as well. And last summer, we were thrilled to be able to celebrate the harvest of the first Judean date in 2,000 years. We had about 100 of them, and these dates are a variety of dates that had gone extinct. And Dr. Soloway and Dr. Salone have managed to bring them back to life. When you read in the Bible about Israel as the land of milk and honey, the honey that you're reading about is not honey from bees. It's actually silan, a type of honey that is made out of dates, and that's what this variety is. It's the original Judean date from the Bible that you read about.
So this is incredible, and everything we've talked about today has been so diverse. Now, the UN put out these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which focus on all these different areas, and all of the projects that you've mentioned today hit so many of them, from partnerships and peace building to water, energy, agriculture, life on land. It's incredible. And when I talk to other organizations, they're all hyper-focused on something really specific. Why did you decide at the Arava Institute to say, we're going to tackle everything all at the same time?
Well, again, going back to what I said earlier, the environment can't wait for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And we believe that working together with our Palestinian and Jordanian neighbors, we are actually building foundations for peace. And so the Arava Institute was founded in order to advance cross-border environmental cooperation in the face of political conflict. So while we are completely aware of the conflict, and while we don't hide from the conflict, in fact, our academic program, one of the key elements of the program is the Peace Building Leadership Seminar, where we talk about the elephant in the room, where we bring the students together to talk about war and occupation and terrorism and all the things that bring up the emotions. And those sessions often don't end very quietly. They can sometimes end with people screaming and yelling at each other and stomping out the door. But what makes the Arava Institute unique is the fact that we are located here on Kibbutz Ketura, which is in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere. So they really have no place to go. But by doing that, we are able to gather to address our common environment. And our environment is made up of all of these different elements.
Hmm.
It's made up of of ecosystems and of water resources and of air and of the sun. And these are all mutual. These are all things that belong to everybody. And so that's our focus. Our focus is really on how do we work together to protect the environment. And when you give people, sort of this kind of playground, this big area where you can do what you want, and we give you the tools and we empower you to do that, and we find that people's creativity comes out, and students just go where they want to go, and they take it to where they want to take it. And our job, we see our job is empowering the next generation to be able to do that.
That's incredible. To wrap up, I actually want to read a quote of yours back to you because I found it really interesting and inspiring, especially in the time that we're living in right now. Vaccination, like mask wearing, is not only an act of self-interest, but it is also an act of civic responsibility required from an overwhelming majority of us in order to stop the spread of the virus. Those of us on the political left or in the environmental movement who often declare our concern for the threat of climate change, climate change poses to humanity, must lead by personal example. Like climate change, the pandemic is an unseen threat that can only be mitigated by everyone doing their part. So when you say everyone doing their part, in just the last few minutes here, what would you say is the most impactful way for people listening to do their part and move the world in a more sustainable direction?
That's a really good question. I mean, I would say this is that I think we all have to recognize, first of all, the mutual our mutual dependence on each other. We are dependent on each other. We can't, what happens in our neighboring country, what happens in our neighboring state, these things impact everybody. And even now in the global world we live in, what happens, halfway across the world, obviously impacts us today. What's the horrific situation that's happening in India right now. This is not something that it's India's problem. It's all our problem.
Sure.
So I think that on every level, people need to recognize our mutual interdependence, and that we need to live our lives that way. We need to live our lives in a way that we recognize that what car we buy, or how we build our houses, or what food we put in ourselves, or also how we consume. All these things are things that all these acts are acts that have an impact on everybody. Perhaps it's because I've been living most of my adult life on a kibbutz, where we all very much understand that we're mutually dependent on each other. That if I decide not to get up in the morning and go to work, that's not just my problem. That's also everybody's problem, because that's less money for the community. That's less. If I decide to damage property, or to just be reckless with a kibbutz car, for example, a car that we all own, well, that means that the next person who's signed up for that car can't drive it. So that's the world we live in today. The world we live in today is really one big kibbutz. And everything we do doesn't just impact ourselves, our own lives, or our families' lives. It impacts our neighbors. It impacts our community. It impacts the world around us. So we need to so that's the most important thing that I think people need to do, is to become kibbutznikim. Think about the world as one big kibbutz, and start acting like it.
What an amazing and inspiring way to end our conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam. It was a pleasure.